And next up, we are moving on to data strategy, a case study. So this is on intuition to insight, building a communications data strategy from the ground up. So joining us for this chat is Noreen Ahmed-Ullah, Director of the Office of Vice President Communications at U of T, and Cameron Steed, Insights and Impact Strategist with U of T as well. So welcome. I can give this.
Just set those with the arrows?
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name's Noreen, and first of all, thank you for sticking it out till the end. We appreciate you for coming out and listening to us, and hopefully we'll try to keep this as engaging as possible. So I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about what we do at U of T Communications and the need and the desire to create this role, which was a data strategist, and Cam will talk to you about the work that he's done since he's been hired in the past year and how he's helped bring us to alignment. So first of all, at U of T Communications, we do communications and marketing, central and institutional communications and marketing for the institution at large. And we covered 3 different teams across 3 different campuses. We have about 75 plus staff, employees that work for us. So the data that we're looking at is very much communications marketing data. There's a whole other arm that looks at institutional data related to students and enrollment and research, and that's the Institutional Research and Data Governance Office. Our focus has always been looking at our own data at U of T Communications and trying to see whether we could create insights that could lead us to improving the work that we do. So as I mentioned, we have about 75 staff members across 3 different campuses. They have various roles in communications and marketing. Some do media relations, some do social media, some do external communications. We have a news site where we publish stories about the University of Toronto, where our writers write our own stories. And we have internal communications, where we send out emails on behalf of the university. We have an internal newsletter that we put out. And then on the marketing side, on the Brand Hub side, we are focused on brand building campaigns. So the data that we had and that we were looking at was varied. It wasn't all of the same stuff that we were looking at. And what we found was, that we basically, all these different teams that made up U of T Communications was gathering data and kind of working in their own silos. So as you can see in the graph on the right, we had people that had advertising data, social media data, public relations data, and event planning data, and they were kind of keeping some of that data to themselves. So they were looking at it. They were looking at it to see how they could improve, but we weren't looking at this in a holistic level for U of T Communications. We weren't looking at it to see how we could actually improve the communications and marketing function of the university. So, there were many needs for why we decided to create this role. One, as I mentioned, was we were fragmented. We were seeing data, and we were all siloed. Everybody was working in their own little pieces. We weren't getting a holistic view. But at the same time, the university culture was changing. There was a lot more focus on decision making, data-driven decision making. And so our portfolio, the communications portfolio, is a newer portfolio within the university. We have other vice presidential portfolios that have been there much longer. And they had already started moving toward more of a data-driven decision-making focus. Ours was one of the first to sort of catch up. And there was a real focus on us, on our department, to start showing our value. So yes, we are getting money from the university, from the central resources to do communications and marketing. So now show us the value of the work that we're doing. So we were asked to show our value. We were asked to show the return on investment, and at the same time, we were trying to do all this information, but because we weren't strategically aligned and our data was all over the map, we really couldn't gather any insights. And so what we ended up doing was looking at creating this role, which is Cam's role, the Insights and Impact Strategist role, and even creating this role was a real challenge for us because, as I mentioned, we've got data strategists and data analysts across the university, but it wasn't necessarily what we were looking for at U of T Communications. We actually needed somebody who was specialized in the metrics of communications and marketing, so they could understand the metrics that our teams were gathering, try to see if they could align those data, which was, again, different metrics for different teams. Is there alignment that we can find? And then start gathering some insights that we could actually use to first help us at communications and marketing improve the work that we're doing, but then also help the university see areas that they could improve. For example, on reputation management. Were there areas that we could improve on reputation management? Were there areas that we needed to improve on brand building? So that's the reason why we created this role. This was something that started off about 3 years ago when there was a real push for us to do this, but it was actually the Vice President of Communications who was hired in 2023, who was a real, she was hired on, this is one of the things that she was hired on, was that she had actually experience in creating a role similar to this at a community college that she was working on, and then actually using that role to start aligning the teams and gathering the insights that they were able to do. So we brought her on board. She helped us create the job description, which was, as I mentioned, a unicorn, because how do you get a comms person who's also really good at analyzing data and then finding insights? But we did. We found somebody, and it's Cam, and so Cam's going to talk a little bit about the work he's done.
Good? There we go.
Behind you.
Yeah, no pressure, right? U of T's first ever Insights and Impact Strategist. The one thing I'll start by saying is that I've worked in marketing and agencies for about 14 years now, and I've done this role in varying capacities since about 2012. The one thing I've found consistently is that nobody knows what the title of this role is. So for U of T, Insights and Impact Strategist in my title, and what that looks like is essentially helping me bring in insights, evaluation, impact, reputation, and strategic advisory across the entire comms team, across 3 campuses, across all the different departments within our UTC umbrella, whether it be social, web, live events, etc. And trying to find a way to consistently not only measure the performance and impact of the various activities that they do throughout the year, but also to make sure that going forward, we are identifying opportunities for storytelling as well as reputational brand management that are in the overall best interest of the university. One of my roles is also to act as a central connector across all of those teams. So as I said, we're spread across 3 different campuses, St. George, our primary campus downtown, as well as Scarborough and Mississauga. You can imagine naturally through geography that a lot of siloing would happen, and that was actually pretty prevalent when I arrived on the scene about 14 months ago. I remember one of the first things I did was ask every team to send me, who had worked on it, a summary or a report around convocation last year, 2024, the June of last year. I got 2 Excel files, 1 PowerPoint, 3 Word documents, and an email. And all of them were different, and all of them had different statistics. All of them used different language to describe similar things and insights. And so there was a real fragmentation across the board that I came in and inherited in an attempt to try and rectify and solve. We also wanted to have frameworks in place. I've heard the word frameworks a lot today, which tells me we're going in the right direction. But we wanted to make sure that our frameworks were not just around how to more effectively plan the campaigns that we do throughout the year, but also get better at our post-campaign reporting, which I'll touch on again in a minute. And when I was hired, the 3 priorities I was told that I should be focusing on is 1, what we called a listening tour. My first the first marching order I received was meet with every single team, understand what they're doing currently, what they're reporting on, what data they have access to, and try to figure out what common metrics exist between each of them. That was the listening tour. Alignment of UTC campaign reporting. As I said, when I arrived on the scene, the convocation report from last summer was sent by different teams in about 4 or 5 different formats. So alignment there to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, moving in the same direction, marching at the same time. I was also asked to try and create a quarterly report framework. Believe it or not, right now at U of T, we have this set up. But when I arrived, there was a lot of campaign reporting that would happen, but no reporting or insights around the broader activities that we do. So for convocation, for example, we will create convocation-related content, websites, media, but nobody at the time was focusing on all of the activities and content and marketing initiatives we were doing outside of those evergreen campaigns. That would be ultimately what is represented in quarterly reports, which, again, as of last summer, hadn't really been introduced across our department. And then in terms of more roadmap and long-term strategic thinking, reputation, tracking, and reporting. The University of Toronto is a large institution. We have a lot of notable alumni and professors and faculty and students, and they're spread all around the world. We are a brand whose reputation is evolving and matters in real time. For all I know, right now, today, something could happen on our campus that could cause our reputation to become spotlight in not maybe just local, but national, even international media. And so we needed to have frameworks and mechanisms in place that if that were to happen, we would be able to track, monitor, and respond accordingly. So the framework we ultimately adopted was AMEC. For anyone who doesn't know, AMEC is the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. And their 6-step framework follows inputs, outputs, outtakes, outcomes, impact, and innovation. I won't go through all of those before then looping back up to the top. But one thing I'll note is that throughout a few of the presentations I've seen today, impact and outcome have been mentioned. Maureen, your presentation touched on outcomes as well. So again, nice to see that we, although we play in the communication space, are still really following the frameworks and templates that different organizations in healthcare and finance and government are also adopting. Ultimately, what this did, though, is empower us to then follow a specific framework for how we want to measure the efficacy of our campaign and communication. My job, in part, is to be a data storyteller, and so to use all of the information that we capture to try and tell the full story of what happened related to that either campaign or event. But then also position UTC as a sector leader in evaluation maturity. This is a relatively new concept, and as I've said, I've been in this industry doing this type of a job for about 12 years now. Up until U of T, when I got this job 14 months ago, I've had to advocate and campaign for my role to be adopted within the various agencies and organizations I've worked for. This is still something that if you're not being championed within your organization for something like this type of a role to exist, I found you really have to fight for, argue, prove the value of these types of role, and I really commend U of T for being forward-thinking enough to want to not only establish a role like this, but also be a leader globally in these kinds of activities. So what have I done in 14 months? Well, thankfully more than just what's on this slide, but a few of the highlights are, created a shared analytics vocabulary. So when we say engagement or impressions, what does that mean? And making sure everybody knows and understands the same definition. We wanted to make sure that we had standardized report templates. As I said, I got 4 different file formats across 9 different reports when I first received the Convocation 2024 campaign summaries. And so a big initiative for me was making sure that all of our outputs looked consistent, on brand with the University of Toronto. I wanted to enable data-informed storytelling through analysis and narrative. As I've said, one of the ways that this role has been defined is as a data storyteller. Another way that I think of that is basically my job, in addition to measurement of performance and impact of our marketing activities, my job is also to find opportunities. So if I think there's an opportunity to reach out to various interest groups or stakeholders or geographically key alumni in certain regions, one of the things I try to do through my data analysis is identify those types of opportunities and then surface them at various meetings to try and influence forward-thinking communication around that. By having somebody dedicated to this job and own it has allowed us to improve our reporting by about 4x. This is going to surprise people, but when I came here and back to school last year, so back to school 2024 happened, the report summarizing our back to school campaign was ready by April 17th of 2025. That was 1 or 2 months before the end of the first year of the students we were reporting arriving to school back in September. That has now been turned around to about 1 month. So regardless of the campaign or the size and scope of it, we try to get the report turned around in 1 month. I come from an agency world where that's 1 week is the goal, so having a month is quite nice, and we've been able to align to that across the entire department. As I mentioned, we also introduced quarterly reports. Our quarterly reporting is kind of weird. Our timing is May to July, so we actually just undertook our first full department alignment and reporting around quarterly performance insights this past September. And one of the other key areas that we've also been able to establish are department-wide benchmarks. So if I said to you, or if somebody asked me, on average, how much does U of T social channels grow in a given month? Nobody knew the answer. Nobody knew it. But now, thanks to our benchmarking and reporting and tracking of our comms data, we can get those types of answers so that now we're not comparing this year's convocation to last year's convocation, because as we know through COVID and various other activities, year-over-year comparisons aren't always in our best interest. So now what we try and do is compare it against more departmental content benchmarks. So page views aren't just based on how many people came to the website this time last year, but rather what is the overall traffic averages we see for things like our convocation hub. So how do you evolve these concepts into actual practical, tangible outcomes and results? And so here are a few examples that I managed and worked through over the past 14 months. And the first is Geoffrey Hinton's Nobel Prize win. We were surprised and delighted last October when Professor Emeritus Geoffrey Hinton won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work in machine learning and AI networks, neural networks. What we did, though, was track the real-time fallout of that announcement. So he won it on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, we had done a full landscape analysis of all of, in the past 24 hours, the media fallout that had happened as a result of it. Not only were we able to track which regions around the world were picking up this story and prominent media outlets that were talking about us, we also identified key individuals that were talking about us. The Prime Minister at the time, Trudeau, made a comment. Chrystia Freeland commented. Other universities and groups within our university network were commenting. We were also able to identify that when it comes to mentions of Geoffrey Hinton and the University of Toronto, we were 6 times more likely to see the U of T and Geoffrey Hinton mentioned together if the publication was Canadian. International publications didn't care so much that he was a university professor. They more cared that he had worked for Google, that he had won a Nobel Prize, and that it was primarily focused on neural networks and machine learning. We were also able to identify opportunities for content that we then later introduced when he went to accept his award in Sweden later that year in December. The next example is from the Globe and Mail, where we were asked by our president's office to analyze the user-generated comments across 5 essays related to innovation in the public sector that had been published over 5 successive weeks across in the Globe and Mail. We used AI for this and took over 1,700 comments and started to identify major themes of discussion, primarily to identify if U of T was being pointed at as one of the main reasons why innovation in Canada had become stagnant. The good news was, through our analysis, it's not. U of T was mentioned, but only in about 2% of comments. Most of the time it was pointed government policy and broader universities and colleges in general in Canada were seen as the reason for the stagnation. But those were insights that were shared with the President's office. The third example there is the main dashboard that we've created for our quarterly reports. As I said, what does our social channels grow by? Nobody had tracked that. One of the key findings, our social channels over the last 3 months grew by 6%, 4% above the average industry benchmark for social channel activity. Now, 6% growth, okay, great. But the key insight that we uncovered was that the majority of that growth had happened on TikTok, 32% just in the last 3 months, June, July, and August. The irony is that through this tracking, TikTok was also the social channel we published the least amount of content to. That's a huge opportunity for a marketing team. Finally, we did this global media reach breakout, and one of the key areas of this, which is kind of hard to see, is in the top left, you see that orange bar. One of the things we did was using AI and natural language processing. I did a full sentiment analysis on all the global earned media that we had collected across any number of different languages to try and identify the major positive themes and negative themes in discussion related to our university. I'm not going to share all of those, just in the interest of time, but this is the kind of insight and data that's available to us in the comms world and what we like to then show through the analysis work that we do. So with the last few minutes of the day, and by the way, thank you guys all for sticking this out. What's next? So for us internally, we are really trying to look to evolve more towards predictive insights. The one limitation that my role in the data that we're collecting has is that right now it exists in the back end across the university in a number of different ways. One of the things we want to do is try and bring all of that data and information in, and working with Kieran, who is from our data governance department, begin to create more customized business intelligence dashboards that takes the data out of Excel files and back-end platforms like Sprout or Salesforce or any of the data capture tools that we use, and evolve those into more predictive insights so that we can understand when it comes to a back-to-school campaign or a convocation campaign or any other campaign for that matter, what kind of insights and goals and targets we should be striving for as a department. We want to continue to build data literacy. Everybody has talked about data literacy. And storytelling consistency across UTC as well. We want to embed evaluations into campaign planning, not just after the fact. So using that AMEC framework and the insights from previous campaigns to try and directly influence future campaigns, as opposed to just saying, this is how we've always done it, I guess that's how we're always going to do it. I want to continue to grow cross-campus collaboration. The 3 campuses and the 90-plus people that we work with just within the University of Toronto Communications Department represent about 1% of the entire workforce across all of the University of Toronto. And every single team, whether it's dentistry or engineering or computer science or humanities, doesn't matter, all of them have data. All of them have back-end statistics and insights that could be of tremendous value to us. But right now, there's not a ton of collaboration happening between those teams because there wasn't a me previously to try and reach out and create those bridges. And then the big initiative for us over the next year is going to be around reputation tracking and introducing reputation tracking into our broader institutional reporting. Right now, we've learned a few things since partnering with a third party to help with our reputation analysis. We do surveying across the Canadian general population to ask various questions related to the University of Toronto. And one of the key learnings in the 5 months we've been doing this is that it takes something pretty significant to change somebody's opinion about a place like the University of Toronto. Our assumption going into it was that if they hear something unfavorable or if there's negative news coverage, people are really going to grab pitchforks and come after the University of Toronto, but that's actually not been the case. What we have found is that month over month, pretty consistently, our reputation only changes as a percentage by a plus or minus of about 2%. So we haven't really seen something significant yet cause that to go down or up in any sort of significant way. But the one thing we have identified is that there are a lot of reputational drivers and, different drivers and activities unrelated to the broader what do you think of the University of Toronto that directly could impact or influence our reporting. So all this to say, the 2 things I'd leave you with is one of the really fortunate aspects of me being offered this opportunity at the University of Toronto was that I had a champion in Noreen and our VP, Christine, who really advocated and fought for this role's provisioning long before I even was aware of the opportunity. Again, I've worked for organizations where that's not the case, and it is an uphill battle trying to convince senior leadership and stakeholders to say, I think there's a lot of value in analysis and interpretation, especially related to comms and marketing, but historically, because it is not a well-defined or known about position, I've always been met with headwinds in trying to get this role established. But the University of Toronto was the one place I came where that wasn't the case. And so if you're trying to work within teams, especially small, lean ones, where you're trying to get more buy-in and influence, rather than fight that battle alone, see if there's a senior director level or above champion who can help advocate on your behalf. It'll make things a lot easier. And the second thing I'll leave you with, especially in the marketing and communications world, is that data is constantly changing. When you play in social media, for example, everything changed after 2017 because of Cambridge Analytica. I used to be able to tell you so much about people's online personas, activities, behaviors, where they went, what they did. But we live in a highly volatile and evolving landscape, especially when it comes to digital comms, that data access and information is constantly changing. And so one of the initiatives that I've undertaken in this role is to try and attend conferences like this, to learn about how people are still capturing data, but not only that data capture activity, but also how they're using it to analyze, interpret, and ultimately drive impact within their organization, which is what I try to do every day. We made it, guys. End of the conference. Well done. Thank you all. There's about 4 minutes left Happy to answer any questions. Cameron, curious how you are doing analytics of media and public comments, free text with the support of AI. Would you be able to expand? Yeah, so there's two types of analysis that I do in the comms world. One is obviously statistical, more quantifiable, where we're tracking things like page views, social audience growth, how much content we create, and of that content, how much engagement does it get. But the other analysis that we do where AI has definitely helped is more around thematic or contextual analysis. If I was to tell you that for every student profile that we create, male versus female, what the difference is in terms of engagement for a male post that features a male student versus a female student, it's 6-to-1. We see 6 times more engagement on posts that feature women versus male students. Now, there's a number of potential reasons for that to be, but what we really have started to identify through AI is just how these trends and conversations and sentiment and user disclosure, user-generated content through AI can be consolidated and identified into major themes of prominence and discussion, which then help us cut through so much noise. Because 10 years ago, if you wanted to know what everybody thought about the Toronto Blue Jays' win, you'd have to read all of the content published about the Toronto Blue Jays' win. And now AI does it for us. Any other questions?
Curious, say AI is doing it for us, just throwing it in Chat GPT, or do you have something that you're using?
Yeah, so we have a Copilot. We use Copilot at the University of Toronto. AI for obviously data security and ethical standards is a very sensitive and important topic for us. And so what we're doing typically is distilling all of the found content we can get captured into a document and then either uploading that document or using different prompts to try and analyze major themes of conversation. We're really sensitive about sharing confidential or sensitive data. And so, for example, the Globe and Mail example, all of that user data, like we didn't see usernames, addresses, profiles. It was literally just the text that we are copying and pasting into a document and then saying out of this entire document, identify prominent themes of discussion. How many times is the University of Toronto being mentioned? That sort of thing. That's what we're using AI, at least in my role. Any other questions? Perfect. Thanks, everybody.